Lensec Live here. What's your perspective? And I'm excited to welcome to the show Jake Parker of SIA. Jake, thanks for stopping by. What's your perspective? How are you?
Thanks, Neil. Happy to be with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a cold time of year for us, especially in Pittsburgh and all over the country. I guess even in Texas, they're going through some stuff too. But our topic today, which, it started in a conversation we had before, Jake, regarding facial rec with a certain situation was going on in the state of New York. And we thought, well, let's just go with jumping with this topic of what facial recognition is, because again, we see, CSI or all those different technology shows where, really are we at the latest type of things to say, oh, we were able to identify their face through facial recognition regarding cameras or some sort of device. So can you define, first of all, what is facial recognition?
I think the simplest way to explain this is it's basically a photo comparison technology. So it's photos, whether it's taken on the spot or a still photo from a video or a photo that's on file. It's a technology that compares photos and tells you how similar they are. So it's used. Facial recognition really is defined into two different types of applications. One is verification, which also known as authentication, where it answers the question: is this person who they say they are? So someone who's already enrolled, verifying that this is the identity. And then the other application is identification. So often used to help identify an image of an unknown person, whether they're in a database that's used by the system.
And a lot of times that's a great way for authorities or the security department to find the perpetrator very quickly, right, with facial rec.
Yeah, and really, there are so many different applications. They can be very complex. You've got ranging from literally opening your smartphone. Apple products use the facial recognition technology to do that, all the way to, as you mentioned, criminal investigation is trying to more accurately and faster identify suspects in a crime, or even witnesses or victims of a crime.
And then it's so important, because without that technology, the perpetrator will end up getting away, or the specific person that was involved in an incident, there's no proof who that person is. Correct?
Right. And there's so just to sort of some background, as far as in the United States, the law enforcement has been using the technology for about 10 years. And it's been used in hundreds of thousands of cases. There are actually many, many success stories of cases that would never have been solved without the assistance of the technology. Missing persons cases, cold cases, things like that. There really is a track record, of success there. And one thing to point out too is in all the law enforcement applications we know of in the United States, the technology actually aids investigators normally in investigating initial leads on a case. It's not used to verify someone's identity as far as the computer result. It's got to be done by the investigators through other means. But that's typically how it's used here in law enforcement.
Interesting. And when you think about specifically enough, what are people's thoughts on facial recognition, especially what has the research shown?
So there's been some controversy in recent years about the technology. And I think really, it's kind of in two areas. One is people are concerned about the potential use of the technology to increase government surveillance of citizens. And we've seen many technologies in this way in other parts of the world that we don't want to see happen here. And then there's also been a lot of questions about the accuracy of the technology. Unfortunately, a lot of that's been based on some misconceptions and some misinterpretation of research that's out there. But I think what has another reason why we were talking about this more now than we were before is technology has gotten so accurate over the past 3 years, even that it's opening up more commercial applications and more government applications that weren't contemplated before because of its performance. And as far as what people think about the technology, we actually at SIA commissioned one of the leading independent research polling firms to conduct a public poll of Americans this last summer. And they talked to 1,000 Americans, a demographically representative sample from all different parts of the country, and found really overwhelming support for use of the technology, especially when it explains some of the very specific current ways the technology is being used, as distinguished from kind of the hypothetical ways we've seen like in the movies, about how the technology is used.
Exactly.
So, 70% support use of the technology. I think it'll make the country safer. Interestingly, about 70% also support its use in ways that would make their workplaces safer, which really deals with the whole different set of uses surrounding access control and security systems. 63% support the ability of homeowners to use the technology in their home security systems to open their doors and things like that. So there is a wide level of support across different use cases. Law enforcement's received the most attention, though, as we just spoke about. Right. But even there, 66% supported law enforcement's use of the technology.
Were you surprised by those numbers when it came out?
I was, because if you were only reading the media narrative about the technology, unfortunately, you're not going to get the facts. But yet it seemed that could really influence public opinion. So far, it seems that doesn't really align with where people are at on this. And especially as we see facial recognition technology kind of becoming part of our daily lives in many ways, I think that's going to continue.
What were you hearing from the media? What is the media saying about facial rec? Like different stories that come out.
Yeah. So one of the concerns is about the performance of the technology across different demographic groups and across races. And with the concern, and I think this is a deeply held concern and a legitimate one, that you don't want a situation where law enforcement is using the technology in ways that would increase the possibility of misidentifying someone. If it's not as accurate for certain races, obviously that's a concern. Almost all of that, the science behind that allegation comes from a single academic paper in 2018. They looked at, Black women, for example, near a very high error rate, like 30% error rate. And of course, that result has gotten repeated over and over and over in the media, and assigned to facial recognition, when in reality, the situation is much different. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST, is actually the world's leading scientific authority on facial recognition accuracy. They've been testing the technology for over 20 years. They looked at demographic performance in 2019, which is called a snapshot in time. And what they found was the leading technologies actually performed evenly across all demographics without any noticeable differences. At the same time, they did find lower performing technologies did have a significant difference, in some statistically significant difference across those groups. However, the spread between the accuracy rates and performance was really only a few percentage points. All of them performed in the 90s, high 90s accuracy rates. So there is an issue that needs to be addressed. The industry continues to address, but it's not nearly the magnitude that it's being portrayed in the media.
Interesting. And how do you need to be responsible as a person who's using it for surveillance purposes?
So the main thing is, and NIST points this out in their study, that you need to know the algorithm that your technology is using. So sometimes an integration will involve more than one algorithm, or a specific one. But the performance, you can't characterize the performance of all facial recognition technologies as all being extremely accurate, or it's hard. You can't make generalizations about it. It depends on what that particular algorithm, how it performs. You also need to know what is the performance metric that is the most important to your application, which will vary. So it's going to be different. If your goal is flow management, that's going to have a different accuracy measurement than if you're verifying someone's identity for a financial transaction, where it needs to be, the accuracy is just different as far as what the performance you need. So I think the main thing is to know your algorithm, and many of these algorithms are NIST tested, and they test them on an ongoing basis. You can find the information free on their website.
Interesting. And I think that process of being responsible with your surveillance is important, but some people just don't understand it, right? Meaning, like, other security professionals might understand what the technology does, but yet don't know that they're doing the wrong thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the information you need about the accuracy of the technologies should be available to you via NIST or via the manufacturer, but definitely you'd want to make sure it's matched up to your purpose.
Definitely. All right. So, going into this, where do you see facial recognition going, and like latest trends in this in the next couple of years?
So certainly, you should be aware that there is a movement by a number of advocacy organizations that have banded together and demanded that there be laws in place that actually completely ban the use of the technology, often in a blanket way that doesn't distinguish between these different uses. Certainly, we understand the privacy and civil liberties concerns about the potential for the government to use this for some kind of mass surveillance way, which we would not support. And the members we work with that produce this technology wouldn't support that either. But if you're talking about an access control implementation where it's enables multi-factor authentication, there just isn't this. There isn't civil liberties concerns with that type of application, and even privacy. We're talking about an opt-in application, and certainly data needs to be protected. And there's many ways that's done, but these just aren't the same things. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is proposals to ban the technology in a way that pretty much bans either all public sector use or even private sector uses without distinguishing between these uses. And we would prefer to see, if there's concerns about a particular use, we prefer to see those addressed real directly and specifically in policy versus a blanket ban or really difficult restrictions that just apply across all use cases.
So why do you think that there's this push for a ban of this technology? Is there any reason?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. There's a long-standing concern among privacy advocacy organizations about technology and its effect on our privacy, and we've seen this happen. So 15 years ago, it was RFID. All right, RFID was going to be Big Brother, tracking you wherever you go and things like that. And there's so many reasons why that's not the case, and now it's used in everything, right? And I think that's kind of
Right.
That's where things will go. And I was pointing out too. I mean, these efforts have had some limited success. At the municipal level, there's been a number of cities that have banned the use of facial recognition for city government use, clustered around San Francisco, Boston, suburban areas. And just more recently, Madison, Wisconsin, and then last week in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But in those places, even there's some exceptions. So for example, in Minneapolis, access control and security applications were exempted from that ban. So there's some recognition that there's a difference across use cases. At the state level, however, there have been no blanket bans enacted that are broad like that, even though it's been proposed in a dozen states.
Wow. Okay. When do we see facial recognition, especially let's go first of all with the public sector?
Yeah, so in the public sector, I talked about the law enforcement history also, even longer than that. So more than 10 years ago, many of our driver's license issuance agencies and ID issuance agencies have used this to make sure that there's no fraud occurring in their issuance. So people aren't creating legitimate IDs, but on false identities, and that fuels all kinds of criminal activity. Drug activity, human trafficking. I mean, you name it. That is what's needed to propel a lot of that criminal activity. So that's longstanding use. Just about every state uses facial recognition in their driver's license issuance agency. But I think emerging or other public sector uses, I know certainly for access control and security, that's a growing area. I think we've seen more growth in the commercial sector for those uses than the government sector so far. But as we're now recovering from the pandemic, there are actually a number of facial recognition enabled applications that are going to become really important, and it's really taken off in the private sector of being able to prove your identity, but also provide proof of your vaccination or COVID test results. And that we actually, I was just speaking with one of our members who actually provided this technology at the Super Bowl. So all of those healthcare workers that were guests at the Super Bowl, they use this technology to verify their identities and their status as they came into the stadium.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, and then you see more, but you're seeing it more happening in the private sector than the public sector. Facial recognition.
Yeah, currently, for those applications, I would say for access control and security use, it's more so in the private sector at this time. However, I know there's several implementations I'm aware of in the school setting. So in K-12 schools, where the technology is used to alert security staff if someone who's not permitted to be on school property does try to enter the building, and runs a check on them that way. In a very limited use case, making sure we don't have sex offenders and other people who are not permitted to be there come into the school. And those have had tremendous success. I was talking to one school district that implemented a system like that, and within the first 2 months, they had flagged 3 sex offenders. Wow. Needed to kind of adjudicate those situations and go down and talk to those people.
And also looking at for an active shooter situation, that would be also utilized really well in schools, especially if they've had violent activity and we're kind of tracking to see what they're doing, right? To make sure, and then that they don't come to this building because they have certain offenses. Not a criminal record could be another reason to use facial recognition, right? Especially of someone entering a school that shouldn't be on school grounds.
Sure, and I think that's one of the things. There's kind of this misperception by some that using the technology is there to track students or to police students, and that's really not how it's being used currently in those projects. And it's based on a threat assessment process that occurs completely outside the technology. Every school district it has a threat assessment process of some form, that gets information from the local community, from the local police department, but also from their own information about folks that they need to watch and to make sure they don't come on the school property.
Very interesting. And so thinking about, we talked about, again, the public sector, school districts. Does this happen in any other public sector? Do you see a lot of facial recognition cameras on, like in the streets and stuff? Not yet, because that's the big cry, right? Not to have those, especially, how you have cameras in certain municipalities. They're not really facial rec ones, are they?
So there's actually not that many municipalities that actually own and operate their own surveillance networks, like in urban environments, but there are some, and I'm not aware of any that are running facial recognition as part of those systems. But and again, like I said, law enforcement uses are really forensic. They're not real-time surveillance applications right now, and we haven't spoken with any law enforcement folks that are really wanting to do that, to go that direction. But that is an important distinction. I think other public sector area is mass transit. I think there's some benefit in addressing emergency situations, or threats of some kind that someone makes there, or even finding missing people. So
you have all these articles available on the CO website. So the latest trends, different articles, different things, people can go to where, Jake?
Sure. Yeah. So go to our website, securityindustry.org, and go to policy issues and facial recognition. We've got the results of our poll. We've got a myths versus facts document. We've also released a principles for responsible and ethical use that we hope can guide policymaking in this area, and many other resources.
Your hope in a lot of ways is that don't fear technology in the continue, because it's going to help security in the long run, right?
Yeah, look, we don't want to see a ban on technology that has very real and proven benefits. But we think we can address the concerns about the potential uses of the technology in public policy that does just that without completely banning the use of the technology. And I think that's the way things should go.
Well, Jake, thanks again for stopping by. Look forward to having you on much more on different topics in security. Anything new coming up that you want to talk about with SIA? Any new news to report?
We'll just we have a conference called the Government Summit. We'll be doing it in 3 parts virtually this year. So be on the lookout for information about that. It'll be April, June, and September. We'll be talking about policies that affect the deployment of security solutions, so including facial recognition, but many others as well.
Awesome. Well, definitely have you back. Thanks again, Jake, for stopping by.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that was What's Your Perspective, Lensec Live. Go to lensec.com live to check out all the information. I appreciate you guys, and tune in next week for another great What's Your Perspective. Take care.